Okay.
Yep.
So once again, good morning, everyone. We have sent you some preliminary materials. We have distributed them into 3 groups. Yeah, for today's session, probably most important is the first batch of materials. If you were able to watch them beforehand, all the better. Then you have a better idea where we're heading towards. If not, this is not a great problem because they're there at your disposal. You can check them out anytime. They're on the Epidoc Training YouTube channel, and also there's slides shared. And in the file that we have sent you, we've just sent to you a file, the link to which you can also find in the chat. There are additional materials which are sort of complementary to what we've already sent you. And now maybe I think it's best to go through first all the things that we distributed beforehand, and to start from the very beginning. What is XML? What are its basic rules, and what is the structure of a basic Epidoc XML file? So now probably I'll share my screen.
And you can follow the slideshow also on your machine, since you'll have access to this shared
Yes,
Google Drive
yes.
file. And as
Yes.
Gabby already said yesterday, you can download, reuse everything that is in those slides, provided you, of course, I mean, you quote the same license as they do.
Okay, I hope now you're seeing it, and as Martina said, you can also follow it by yourselves on your machines. So first and foremost, what is XML, or the so-called extensible markup language? It is, as its name shows, language, or rather meta language, which is used for annotation, for description of text and the metadata to the text, which means we will use here annotation and markup and tagging as synonyms for the purpose of this, for our purposes, which means that when you have as in our case, a text-bearing object, an object such as an inscription or a seal or a mural or a graffito, or I don't know, a gem or something, any object that is a physical object, or a manuscript for that matter, a physical object, and at the same time bears some text. You can annotate the text itself, as well as the object, its history, where it originated from, where it is now, its physical description, and everything concerning the object or the physical bearer of the text itself, the so-called metadata. You can annotate them in XML. You probably know some other markup languages, for example, HTML, which is the standard output of most of the web pages nowadays. The ML in it also stands for a markup language, but, and those of you who have watched the preliminary materials already know that languages such as HTML largely deal with how text, or rather a hypertext with all its links, images, etc., is displayed on the screen for the end user, whilst XML is deals preliminary with the so-called semantic tagging. You tag bits and pieces from the text and from the object that concerning the object that bears the text, according to their semantics, and how later on they are going to be displayed is another question entirely. There are some things called transformation scenarios. There is a language, a special syntax of its own called XSLT, a lot of which is embedded into the EFES service, which you have probably installed already, and they do the visualization for you. But the thing you need to know first is how this meta language by which you're describing the features of the text and of the object that bears it work. First of all, everything that is annotated and that is embedded and that is contained in the text can be annotated in a sort of hierarchy. There are semantic elements which could be put into other semantic elements. They could be nested, as it is said. And here you see an example of this hierarchical structure. You have an element called citation, which contains the whole element citation contains the sub-elements or daughter elements, author, title, and imprint, which on its side contains publisher, place, and date. And the elements which are on the same level are called sibling elements, and elements which are on different levels are parent elements and daughter elements. You see much as a genealogical tree. An element is a text surrounded by the so-called tags, the opening tag and the close tag. You probably know those in the triangular brackets, which are identical in their names, but the opening tag, which signals the beginning of the element, and the closing tag are distinguished by the slash at the beginning of the closing tag, and an element is the opening and the closing tag, and together with its contents, what is embedded into between the opening and the closing tag. And as I said, elements can be nested within one another, but they cannot overlap, which means that you open a tag for one element, you open a tag for a second element, which is wholly embedded into the first, and then you close the tag of the second element first, and then you close the tag to the first element. I don't know if you here there is a clear example of that. There is a word element, which is signaled by W, opening tag W, closing tag /W, which should be entirely contained within the line element. And if you present them in a tree-like structure, line will be the parent element and word will be the daughter element. So yes, as you can see here, the opening and the closing tags of the second element should be entirely contained in the first, which is more general, more encompassing, and the whole of which the daughter elements are parts. There are empty elements. which means there are elements which have no text between the opening and the closing tags. There's an empty space between that. For example, the element for some sort of boundaries within the text, such as line break or a page break or something like that. In the inscriptions, we have a lot of line breaks, or more properly called line beginnings, which signal that the boundaries between the lines of the inscription. One line ends and another starts. And you need not have anything inside between the opening and the closing tag, and they could be presented as one tag, not as a whole of an opening and the closing tag, but as one tag which has the slash at the end. So it's the same if you write line break and then nothing, and then slash line break, or you write just one tag, opening and closing at the same time, which says line break slash. And editors, XML editors such as Oxygen, quite often automatically corrects this into this, because there's no point in maintaining this empty space here. If you care about the numeration of the lines, don't worry. There is a way to do this. And the way to do this is by placing inside the opening elements other stuff which are part of the syntax of XML, which are called attributes. In great many instances, simply an element, an opening and a closing tag, does not give us all the information that we need to have. And you need some additional information which you add in the opening elements by the so-called attributes. For example, if you have in an inscription a name like Severus, and you want to state that the first letter is not present on the stone, the S of Severus, but we restore it as editors of the inscription, you put the element supplied, but you wish to indicate if the letter has been lost, and that's why we don't have it on the monument, or it was omitted by the scribe, or it is not present for another reason. So you can add in the opening tag of the supplied element an attribute named reason, and all the attributes are followed by an equal sign, and then in between brackets you give an attribute its value. So, for example, if you want to indicate that the S of Severus has been lost with the time, and you restore it as an editor, which normally would be displayed in a digital as well as in a printed edition as S in square brackets, you write supplied, the supplied opening and closing tag with attribute reason, which has a value lost. And an element may have more than one attribute. You can have a gap in a monument, you can have a lacuna, which is lost, and you can indicate what is the extent of the space that has been lost. If you say here we have a lacuna measuring up to 3 characters, you can say gap reason lost, a second attribute quantity measuring 3, and unit measuring characters. If you have 3 lines lost, you can have gap reason lost quantity 3 unit line. Or if you have a gap that is of an unknown extent, you don't know how many of the text, how much of the text has been lost. Here you have another attribute, gap extent unknown, reason lost. We will deal with that in detail. So every element has its sub-elements. Each one of the elements and their sub-elements can have attributes, a specific set of attributes. Not all the attributes can be applicable to all the possible elements. And the attributes have values which are usually a closed list. If you have an attribute quantity, you must have a whole number. For example, there's a list of suggested or recommended values. And sometimes, for example, in the attributes such as type, there are some universal attributes. You can have an open list of values, but there is a document, usually to an XML file, put at the very beginning of the file, which indicates which are the permitted attributes, values, and elements. And of course, some attributes may have more than one value. A kind of special attribute is the XML ID, which is used as a unique identifier, usually used for a unique entity, what we quite frequently call a named entity, which may be a personal name or a place name or some sort of unique event, for example, the Second Punic War or something like that. And anything that you need to identify only once in your document, and then use this ID as the same identifier for the same entity across the rest of the text or across the rest of the collection of texts. So here we have, I don't know if you see it well, you have a start tag and the end tag, the content of the elements. You have an element name in the start tag and an element name which must be the same in the end tag, preceded by a slash. And then you can have an attribute name. Here we have an XML line, which is another special attribute which is very useful, which indicates the language in which is the content. And you have the attribute value. White space is significant, and we will see a bit more detail about that in a while. In the opening tag, element names and attributes must be separated by one space, by white space. In the text, the words must be separated by white space, but here the quantity of white space, the extent of white space is not significant. We will see this in a while. So, for example, XML differentiates between imperator and imperator, and in any case, it differentiates between this and this. It reads this as an element name, and it reads this as an element and attribute name, and they must be separated. But no matter how much space you put between the element and the attribute name, the XML editors such as Oxygen and the visualization tools such as EFES treat them all the same. So one thing you need to be careful about is to form your document well. Always start and end the tag, be it opening or closing tag, with opening or closing triangular brackets. Don't miss the slash in the end tag. Don't miss the equal sign and the quotation marks in attribute values. Be sure that all the elements have matching beginning and ending tags, and the elements don't overlap. Usually, except this well-formedness, the document should also be valid. There is a difference between a well-formed document, which is in proper XML syntax with no errors, no omissions, no typos, and an XML file which is valid against a schema. A schema is a set of rules that defines the names of the elements and the relationships in which they can appear, which is a very useful thing to control the content of your XML files across one project, to make sure that you associate each separate XML file with the same schema so that all the files are encoded in the same way. You haven't chosen the name, say, funerary inscription in one case and tombstone in the other case, and I don't know, stele in the third case. The schema points you to the places in a file, if there are such, which diverge from a common standard, which you have imposed on all your XML files, and it helps your XML editor to suggest to you the possible elements, sub-elements, attributes, and their values as you encode the text. And here's an important note that element and attribute names in a schema do not have a real semantics. So yes, one of the important standards in XML encoding in digital humanities, in using XML to encode texts and objects for purposes of the humanities, is the text encoding initiative. Here you have a great example of schemas, but I would say that TI or text encoding initiative is probably the one you should look out. And the Epidoc Schema, which is designed for the purpose of describing text-bearing objects, such as inscriptions, papyri, and now as the Sigidoc branch is being developed in Byzantine lead seals and things like that, usually ancient and or medieval, but not necessarily from these periods. You can also encode more modern inscriptions. Epidoc is a kind of subset to TI, so more or less the Epidoc rules are a subset of the general XML rules, which are elaborated by the Text Encoding Initiative or the TI. So they propose possible solutions which are suitable for the encoding of such types of documents as I enumerated: inscriptions, papyri, and other text-bearing objects, usually historical documents, whilst TI is really large and can be used for a lot of purposes. For example, transcription of live speech, textual corpora, dictionaries, and all other purposes like this. And there is a general Epidoc XML schema which could be applied to each XML document, and it guides you through the process of encoding a file. Up until now, do you think that there is something to be added. Do you have any questions, remarks, things you would like to comment? You can. Here is a file which deals in slightly more detail with the rules of XML, which were generally outlined in the previous presentation. Basically, XML is text. It's text plus meta text, which is used to annotate bits and pieces of the text. So it could be easily written down in a very basic text editing program, such as Microsoft Notepad or something like that. We don't do this simply because it's much harder to look out for mistakes in a plain text file, while the XML editors that we have are better in displaying the separate elements, the hierarchy between the elements, and also the elements in the attributes, and you can associate a schema in an XML editor, and the editor follows you through the encoding to check the well-formatedness of your document, and also to check its validity according to a schema which is predefined, which you cannot do in a plain text editor, but theoretically, an XML file could be opened with a plain text editor, and it is nothing but text. It is preferable that you use Unicode fonts with all the special characters in it. Usually, as you know, we add editorial characters, such as different types of brackets, etc., which all could be encoded in XML. The XML, as we said, should be well formed first, and then valid according to a schema. You see the opening and the closing tag, element attribute value, and the content. The spacing that we mentioned, and something else which is very important, you can put notes into the XML file, which are started when you open the triangular bracket by an exclamation mark and followed by 2 dashes, which means that it is treated by front-end services such as EFES that process XML files, and by all the XML editors, they are treated as simple text, whilst the other things included into triangular brackets are treated as a part of the XML code. If you want to leave a note to yourself or to other encoders with which you collaborate, you can insert comments which are signaled by this part in the opening tag. Usually, then the XML editor marks this automatically as a comment. And this is very useful if you, especially if you collaborate with somebody on your files. It's useful to leave notes to each other to see, okay, what do we do with this content here? Should we use this way of describing the content or another way? Because as you will see when we have the hands-on exercise, there are usually more than one way to do almost anything, almost everything in Epidoc XML. So it's a matter of choice. How do you choose to encode this or that. And something very useful, you can, if you are not sure about any part of the code that you have, but you don't want to erase it completely, you can comment it out, as we say, by adding this to your opening tag, and then everything until the closing tag, including it, is preserved in your file as a command, but it is not treated as an XML code. We will see that. So yes, in the text, if you have a text which contains triangular brackets or the ampersand sign, in the text you should not have this, since this is read as a part of the code from the XML editor. If you need to put somewhere in the text itself signs like this, you use a special combinations of characters, which if you wish, then we can show you. But almost anything which in addition of an inscription is signaled by these special characters could be encoded in another way, so you don't have to worry about that. Of course, we repeat once again, all open tags which are non-empty must close. All elements must be wholly contained by the bigger elements in the hierarchy, their parents, their ancestors, and the whole document, every element in the hierarchy is embedded in another element, and every other element is embedded in a larger parent element until we reach the point of the so-called root element, which contains all the other elements, all the other tags within it. And the document starts with the opening tag of the root element and ends with the closing tag of the root element. So the whole document must be contained by one root element, which in the case of the Epidoc files is TEI, because Epidoc is a subset of TEI. So we have inherited this from general TEI. For example, maybe, I don't know, maybe here you can tell what's wrong with the well-formedness of the document. For example, you have a book, you have a page, you have paragraphs within a page, and you have one paragraph which starts on one page and ends on the next page. And a common error is to encode this as a paragraph, but put the end element of the page here. You cannot do this because you do overlapping of elements. There are other ways you can indicate that a paragraph starts on one page and continues on another page. One of which is to close the paragraph before closing the page tag, which is, it works, but it's not the best possible solution. Another way is to indicate with additional attributes and values that this and this are parts of the same paragraph. And then when you put this into a platform such as EFES, you say, okay, treat all paragraphs that have this attribute and paragraphs that have this attribute as matching, and put them into one, and put the page break in the middle of that. Another way is to use empty elements to indicate boundaries, which is probably the most elegant way, and probably the reason why these empty elements are so useful, because they don't have an opening and a closing tag. They have just one tag. You can put them as boundaries anywhere you like in your document without disturbing the hierarchy of the other elements, without doing element and tag overlapping. And then you can also give them attributes and values which to indicate page numbers. Okay. What do you think are the mistakes here in these three examples? In the first example, you can unmute yourself for talk, and or you can write it down in the chat. I don't know. For example, you have a name Theodotos, and you tag it as a personal name with the element name, and you give also an attribute which points you in this case the attribute key, which is somewhat obsolete in Epidoc. There are other attributes which you can use, for example, reference, but nonetheless, and then you give this, hoping that this will turn out to be italic. You cannot have any encoding in the attribute values. Usually the attribute values have a very limited set of things which you can do with them, and putting code within the value is not recommended. Yes, that's the case. What about the second one? It's, I think, derived from some Old English manuscript or something. Yes?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
I can hear you. I don't know about the others.
Okay, I think that we can't have angle brackets inside the content. Any human punctuation must be erased.
Yes, that's right. I don't know about manuscripts. I think that here this should indicate that this is added by the editor, this there part, this one. But if you put, yes, Lina is very right. If you put these angular brackets here, this should be read by the XML editor as an element name. And it will give you the mistake that this is a opening tag, and you must follow it with a closing tag with the same name. But you don't need an opening tag with a name like this. The only tags which are used here are paragraph beginning and paragraph end. But here you can encode it in another way. If you want to see that this, if you want to say that this is supplied by editor, you remove all the special characters here, and you tag this in another way, which you have in the cheat sheet. This is the mistake it will give to you, and yes, there you go. What about this one? Yes, 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 yes. You're very right. But yeah, in this case, it would even.
I think that Svenja raised her
Yes,
hand.
yes, yes.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I think it's not allowed to use the and sign, but rather maybe give two author elements.
Yes, if you use this ampersand sign, it usually indicates in XML that there is a special entity we want to denote with this, and there are other ways. Yeah, so it will give you the following error. If you want to use this sign in the content part of the element, there are ways to do this with a special string of characters. But this, as well as this and this by themselves, should be avoided. So yes, the schema and the benefits of using the schema. And yes, this is it, more or less, which complements in a way the things which we already showed you in the previous slides. So up to now, any questions, remarks, doubts, anything?
I have a remark. Can I?
Yeah.
I just wanted to reassure you that this is, of course, a whole lot of information which will get so much easier to understand once we do it in Oxygen. So do not worry at all. I know it might be overwhelming at times, but don't worry. This is like pure theory. And once we get to practice, it's like super easy and it will go very smoothly.
Yes.
So do not worry by all means.
And besides, when we say that XML is just another kind of text, you know that as a humanities scholars, you all deal with texts of different sorts, so it won't be anything new to you, essentially new. It's not like a programming language or something. And yes, besides, it's much easier when it comes to encoding your own material. You will see how much simpler it is than just watching a bunch of presentations. And the basic structure of the Epidoc XML file, as you can see it here, is the following. Here you can see this is the root element. This is the first element which opens the file, and the element which closes it. And everything else is embedded within it. And within it, you have two big parts. The TI header, as you can see, Epidoc inherited everything with from the TI, the Text Encoding Initiative XML, since Epidoc is a subset of TI. I can show to you in this way, or I can use this preview because it shows more clearly the hierarchy of the elements and their sub-elements. And every Epidoc TI XML file contains the TI header part, which starts here, and if you follow it in a linear way, it's not quite easy to follow it, but in the Oxygen editor, you can expand and collapse all the elements and everything they contain, so it's more easily seen. The TI header is the element which contains all the sub-elements related to the metadata of the document, of the XML document you're creating, as well as of the physical object of which this XML document is a description. So you have a file desk, which stands for file description, file desk elements. And within the file desk, you have a source desk element, which is the description of the source, the actual monument, be it a manuscript or a papyrus or a epigraphic monument or a seal or a graffito or anything which has served as a source for your XML file. First, the XML file must have a title, which is embedded in title statement and sub-element title, and a publication statement which should specify who created the electronic file, for the purposes of which institution or project, and things like that. And you usually have the ID number. And the source desk description contains MS-desk, which in TI XML stands for manuscript description, because it has been used primarily for manuscript as original sources, and then we inherited this to also describe monuments on stone, but the names of the elements are somewhat preserved across. You have an identifier of the monument. Let's say here MS stands for manuscript identifier. If you have a repository, for example, a museum or something, and an inventory number in the repository, you can use this. You can also use an alternative identifier if you don't have this. You have a physical description of the monument, of which a sub-element is object description. You describe then the physical support of the object, of what material it is made, what type of object it is, because you know in sigillographic collections perhaps no, but in epigraphic collections we have some typology of the types of monuments. It is an altar, or it is a stele, or it is a relief, or it is something else. And usually there are limited numbers, a limited number of object types that the inscriptions are put upon. Then you have the dimensions, the physical dimensions of the monument. And then after describing the physical support of the monument, which starts here and ends here in the document template, another part of the object description is the description of the layout, which means where exactly on the physical object the text is placed. For example, if it is a sarcophagus, it could be placed only on one of the sides of the sarcophagus, or on all of them, or on two of them. If it's a cup or I don't know, a baptistry, it could be placed along the side of the cup or the baptistry basin, or things like that. So this is the layout. Then you have a part of the physical description. This is all physical description, which is not a description of the object itself, but the description of the physical characteristics of the written text, the hands that have written it. If there is one hand or several hands, what are the letters, what are the peculiarities of the script used, what are the letter heights Usually in epigraphic documents, we indicate letter heights. And if they are the same throughout the monument, or the letters at the beginning or at the end are of different size and things like that. And then you end with the physical description of the monument and you describe its history. Provenance, the origin, yeah, it's a bit confusing at first glance, because you say what's the difference between origin and provenance? The origin is the place where the monument has been or had been originally, and the provenance can be the place where the monument is found, which could be the same or could differ from its place of origin. You could have an inscription, or this holds even more true for manuscripts or papyri or seals. You can have monuments, you can have objects where the place where they had been found is not the same as the place from which they originate. And you can also have provenance with another attribute, type observed, which means either the modern location, which could be a third place, different from the place of origin and from the find spot, or it could be any other place where the monument was observed at some point in time. For example, we have monuments which are now lost, and you can say this was last seen somewhere, but now we don't know where it is and if it still exists as a monument. And within the place of origin, actually within the origin element, which indicates not only place, you can indicate oric place, and you can indicate the date of origin also with the element oric date. So you can say this is an inscription which is from Asia Minor, and it is from the 3rd century AD. It was found somewhere in Constantinople, the present-day Istanbul, because it was replaced at some point in late antiquity, the early Middle Ages, and now it is in the lapidarium of this or that museum in Istanbul, for example. Or it was last observed as a part of the church wall in Hora, in Karye, but nowadays we don't know where it is and what has happened to it, and things like that. This part could be really interesting to describe, and they delve deep into it. Then all the metadata of the monument, all the description of anything concerning the monument is finished, and you can have at this point, after ending the TI header, you can have an element called facsimile containing a reference to a photograph of the monument. You can put it here, and then in a platform such as EFES, the photograph will be displayed, provided that you give it give the proper address of the photograph, be it somewhere on the internet or somewhere in the local folders of your project. It is possible to do both. And then you have the main text of the monument, which is the second big part of the Epidoc template. And usually everything here is contained in a sub-element called the body of the text, which starts here and ends here. And you can have different divisions of the text and the accompanying paratext. You can have the text of the edition of the monument itself. You can have a separate division for the apparatus criticus, for various readings and other notices about the text itself. You can have a separate division for the translation, in as many languages as you wish. You can have an additional attribute XML lang here, and you can put translations in English, German, French, Italian, Greek, Turkish, Bulgarian, whatever. You can have also a commentary, and here you put at the end also the bibliography if needed, if you have any bibliographical units that could pertain to the text or the commentary or the apparatus of the inscription. So the text of the text-bearing object itself is within the text body part of the XML file, and you can have the addition of the text itself, the apparatus, the translations or commentary and bibliography, all into once, put into separate divs or divisions. Okay. This is it for the most general introduction to what XML is and the anatomy of the XML file. Do you have anything to say about that for now? You want to add something? You want to remark something? You want to comment something? We want to probably ask if I want to do this or that with my monument. What do I do? Yes, Lina?
Yes, I wanted to ask you something. Is it obligatory to follow the exact order? For example, we have to firstly put the physical descriptions, then the hands, then the history, or we can mix it?
Usually when you associate a document with a certain schema, you should follow the way the schema is. First you put this, then you put that, then you put that, then you put that, which makes sure that you do all of your files in the same way. Otherwise, you tend to forget. You do one monument this week, you do another monument next week, and you displace the order of things, or you use different names for the same phenomena which you observe. And it is very useful to have a schema which makes sure you do everything under the same pattern, which includes which follows which. This is including the order of the elements, and as you will see in a while, when you start encoding a monument, if you start typing an element, it says element so and so not allowed here. It should be contained into this or that parent element, or element text must contain at least one of the elements Y, Z, and W, for example.
Okay, so this rule apply also in the name tags. For example, we have to put reason, lost, then quantity, then unit.
Well, more or less, yes. From personal observation, from personal experience, I should say that maybe if you put first unit and then quantity, or first quantity then unit, it won't give you a mistake.
Okay.
The order of the attributes and values in this case. And in the text itself, as you will see, in the text itself, there is no hierarchy of the elements.
Okay.
I mean, here you can have supplied. Supplied can contain something within it, but it must not necessarily. When in the text itself, you're more free. But in the description of the metadata, you're not too free. They're formatted in the same way. But in the text itself, it depends what you have in the text. Okay. If you have in the text something within something else, you are allowed to encode it as it is. If you have a personal name within a part which is supplied, you don't have a rule which says that you cannot put a personal name within a supplied part, or that you cannot. It is usually it is allowed to you're freer, but this concerns only the div type edition part of the monument, part of
Okay.
your file.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And
Maybe.
if I can add
Yeah.
a small thing regarding Lina's question, when then you have like a project or of your own, or when you're working on a project, then you can also decide on a project basis if you want like to slightly change something in the metadata. For example, I want provenance to come before lettering, I don't know. And in that case, there's also something that Mitko already talked about, these transformation scenarios using the XSLT technology, which we won't go into in this workshop, but just so you know that it exists. And you can't like change every time that you are encoding a text of a manuscript or of a monument, but it has to be decided upfront. And it's like, I mean, it's like during a publication, what do you want to come first? What do you want to make, more visible, less visible? And you will see that, for example, our project has changed slightly some of the things that are in the TI header. And we made this by customizing our XSLT style sheet. But I also did want to say another thing, which I forgot. Yes, that everything, as Mitko already said, is pretty much made in order to give you and your corpus and your publication as much consistency as possible. So you will not, I mean, once you follow a schema, once you use an intelligent XML editor such as Oxygen, and once you like stick to the 5 rules of XML, which are, I mean, they're like 5 rules, not more, this will ensure you publish your things consistently and with no mistakes. So the mistakes margin is like very, very thin. So it's actually easier to do this rather than keep your publication, your paper publication consistent throughout.
It is also, there is a, on the main site of Epidoc, I will give it here in the chat, probably we should add it to the additional links in the documents that we have prepared. There is somewhere in there, there's the guidelines, which in addition to the slides which we have prepared, which not we, but the Epidoc community has prepared for you, there is also the Epidoc guidelines, and there is also the Epidoc schema, which can be downloaded here. Oops. And then you can add it to your XML document, or you can just copy the address here, which is preferable. And when you open your Oxygen, put it in the first lines, and then everything will be conformant to that schema. Should we see, first of all, have all of you installed Oxygen by now? Does any of you have any problems with that? We can guide you through the process if this is the case. not probably. If you open your, not probably, if you open your Oxygen, wherever you have installed it, I have some Epidoc XML files already open in it, so I will show it to you. It's really not that visible, but
Mitko, if you're showing something, we're not seeing it.
oh, you don't.
No, because maybe you shared only a part of the screen.
Okay, I will reshare it now. Now you probably see it. Here you see some comments, as I told you. First of all, when you open a new, is it legible on the screen? Do you see it? Okay. Do you see the screen I'm sharing?
Yes, definitely.
Yes, okay.
So
when you open a new XML file, you have the first 2 or 3 lines with some automatic service information, so to say, technical information. The first thing you have when you open any XML file is this one, but then you can assign a schema to your XML file, and usually the best way to do this is to give a link to the schema which exists somewhere on the net. In this case, on the latest Epidoc schema is on the Epidoc site, and whenever it is updated, you you can check your file against the latest version of the Epidoc schema. As you can see from this particular file, if you want a corpus which is bilingual or trilingual or something like that, there is a way to choose between languages, and every element which can have a content in 2 or 3 different languages can be duplicated by then giving it an XML lang attribute and different values of the XML lang attribute. Usually the values for these attributes are more or less standard. You give the ISO codes of the languages, either with 2 letters or 3-letter codes. If you're doubting about what is the language code to any language, you can check them. There is a list on several places on the net, which are the 2-letter and 3-letter language codes. But this is not the point. The point is that here in the beginning, you can assign a schema to your document. And I think Gabi has shown how to do this in a video we sent you. Then when you start typing something, okay, maybe, okay. Yes, this is the language file. When you create a new XML document, here you see there is just one information that that goes with it. Then you can assign a schema to it. These are transformation scenarios. Okay, I'm trying to.
It's the red pin.
Yes.
I don't remember which one is. Okay, that's it.
Yes, these are the.
In this case, I think it's better that we copy paste the link because we did not download it onto our machine. So
yes. So probably, yeah. Here you have the this information, which could be copy pasted, and then you have a first 3 lines of information together with the opening tag, but we have a mistake here because the opening tag must be followed by closing tag, and everything else could be put in between. It still is not a valid file because it is empty. It says that this must contain this or this or this. For example, TI header is the first thing that you have, and you see it comes with all the other information that you need. Here you have title, say you have publication, something like that. You can simply put names here, but probably in publication. Okay, if I simply put text in here, it says that, I don't know if you see it, probably not, but I cannot make this bigger. Text not allowed here. You should have some other elements within which you can then put text. For example, publisher. And then you start with the source description and all the possible things which could be contained in the source description. For example, MS-DESC, which stands for manuscript description, which is in the case of our type of monuments not entirely correct, but we have inherited this from the TI. MS identifier, can we put some text here, say, well, here probably some repository. And if you put something here, it will be a mistake. After repository, we're required to have a ID number. And it goes so on and so forth. And then don't forget to save it somewhere. So here. And then you can, no, this is a transformation scenario. Then you can check its validity and its well-formedness. Here with this document with a slight checklist. Now it is not full. This is why it gives a mistake. But when you fill in all of the information, okay, here we have TI header after this facsimile, probably. and text and body within the text. Still not, but yes. And the elements which need to have content in them are listed here. They cannot be left empty within the schema. If you have a facsimile, then you must have graphic and some sort of URL for the document, etc., etc. In the body, you must have div type, yes, edition, at least. Now, probably there are no mistakes. And you can try to validate your file. Okay, there's another. You can also check well-formedness, which is another thing. But if you try to validate your file, it would check the well-formedness at the same time. So probably you can do this. And if your file is still in process of being saved or in process of being checked, it will appear with a small asterisk at the beginning.
Perhaps we have to save before validating.
I've done it. About now. It thinks. It says another operation is in progress, which means it still validates it. Okay. You can see what you want to have is this small green dot here, which means that your document is both well-formed and valid. But if you have problems somewhere, it will become red all of a sudden, and it will point you to the exact line in the code where the problem is. You can, as in most decent editors of whatever, you can, of course, undo things, and it becomes green again. So this is how it works in practice. Do you want to now, I don't know, probably repeat this operation with the creation of a new file, associating the schema to it? As Martina said, it's easiest done with copy paste of a code I will give you, and then try to go through the semi-automated autocomplete, which the schema leads you through. Would you like to do this? Do you have particular inscriptions on which we can work? The text of the inscription you can put right away into the div type edition. If you don't have, we'll give you a text right away. Do you want such, and do you prefer Greek or Latin? Or perhaps you have some texts of different, because what I have chosen are classical Greek and Latin texts, and maybe you have medieval, early modern, I don't know, depending on what you're working on.
We can also, Mitko, I don't know if you agree, we can also try, I mean, the file that you showed before, the one with the edition structure.
Yes.
You can copy paste from that, right?
Yes.
So we can also create a new
yes.
File, P5 in Oxygen, and then copy paste the edition structure of Epidoc, and it will give a bunch of errors, of course, because it's not full yet, but we can start from there and fill in information. I don't know if
yes. That's quite reasonable. So we create a new XML document. It always asks you if you want to create an XML document, because you can create also XSLT style sheets and different things here. Oops.
we're not seeing your screen.
Okay,
Are you?
okay. How now screen share? So if you create this, if you create a new XML document, you end up with this. Then let's go and copy paste the structure of the Epidoc XML file. Here it is. Well, after the XML version 1.2 encoding UTF-8, which is quite crucial for our types of documents, I need to save this, because we need to use Unicode, especially for historical texts. This will be inscription number 2. Keep track on where you're saving your files. It's better that they're all in one place, together with some other files such as the authority files, which we can deal with later. Then here between this and this, you can also copy the schema. Which associates a schema to your inscription. And then, yeah, there are mistakes here and there because we haven't filled all the necessary things to be filled. You see on here, you have in the upper part of the document, you have the elements, the main elements of the structure. You have the root element, TI. When you press this, it marks everything from the beginning to the end of the document, except for the service lines, so to say. When you go with your mouse over the TI header elements, and then if you click on it, it marks everything from the beginning and from the end of this element. It gives you the sub elements. TI header consists of file desk, source desk, MS desk, history, and origin, and you can navigate between those if you need. And there is also a way to, here on the left part of your Oxygen window, you have outline. And when you click on outline, it gives you the hierarchy of the text. TI, then TI header, then file description, which contains title statement and publication statement, and title statement contains title. Sorry, this cannot be made bigger. So you have to go and see for yourself. And then you can start filling in the information. If you wish, we can start with the text here. Should we use a, do you see the browser window? Should we use an exemplary Greek or Latin text? I have both.
We only see oxygen, so we can't see the browser window.
Okay, then I will share everything, which is.
Yeah, Miko, when you share your screen, tap on the
The
corner left.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the first.
So that it shows when you.
Which shows everything. Now you probably see.
Exactly. Yeah.
Here's a bunch of windows which we don't need now, but so this is a Latin monument, which you can do if you wish. And this is, oops. And this is a Greek monument. The Latin monument is from Rome. The Greek one is from the region of today's Bulgaria, the province of Thrace. I will also give you the, oops, why? You have all the metadata necessary, probably not all, but a lot of them, in the epigraphic database Heidelberg for the Latin one. In the PHI Greek inscriptions for the Greek one, you don't have. But some of the metadata can also be found because these are monuments which I've been able to find through the Klaus Labi database, which also shows you around to different other databases. And in Klaus Labi, you also have the original publication in an epigraphic, which I can also give you. But for now, if you wish, we can work on the text itself. Which should be put here. Which one should we use? The Greek or the Latin? Maybe most of you are Greek scholars here, Byzantinists, so maybe the Greek one. What does the text say? It says that, let us look at it in this way. There is the, yeah. It's probably the first time that nobody cares about Latin, I don't know. We have put it in here, but the upper part of the monument is broken and we don't know how much of it is lost. But we know for sure that it is lost because it starts in the middle of nowhere. We have 10 lines in what has 11 lines in what has survived up to us. We have some parts which are restored, as you can see with the square brackets. We have some letters which are not clear, as you can see from the dotted letters, the dots below. We also have a lacuna within the part which is preserved. And we also have the things written in bigger characters, in capital characters, in uncial characters, a part of the text which is clearly legible, but not, you cannot make any sense out of it. And what else do we have? The round brackets indicate abbreviations which are resolved in the editorial text. The monument says L, we restored it as Lukios or Lukio in the dative case, because we know that this is the name. And we also, on the top of it, we have a numeral, which we can also encode. And of course, we can encode the names. Here we have two typical Roman imperial names of Roman imperial magistrates. In this case, these are the consuls for the respective years, which were Lucius Cornelius Anilinus and Marcus Aufidius Fronto, which is an excellent way to give us the date of the monument. We know from the annals of the consuls in the Roman Empire in what exact year did those two were those two consuls. So we also have a part of the metadata available to us directly from the text of the monument. Another part of the metadata, we will have to consult the original publication, which is, we cannot mistake this, which is in Latin, but we will go through this. I will give you the place in the corpus of the Greek inscriptions from Bulgaria. And here we have everything we need to start encoding this. Okay. Shall I start? No, first probably we should show some how to encode words, perhaps. What do you think?
Okay, perhaps as a very first thing, let's show some Leiden.
Okay, okay.
What do you think it's sensible?
Yes.
Before we go on a break, I think we can like do that.
Yes. So this is a shortened version of the cheat sheet, which contains almost all the necessary things that you have. First, line breaks, or as they may be more properly called, line beginnings. You don't use this division, or you're not obliged to use this visualization from the printed edition. You can simply indicate where line beginnings are. And you see these are empty tags with LB, and then you can have an attribute number. Line beginning number 1, line beginning number 2, and the transformation scenario, which is embedded into the EFES service that you have all installed, is made so as to show you the number at every 5th line, as is the standard practice for epigraphical edition. Of course, if you decide to do something else, there are ways to do it, but probably you won't need this at the beginning. If there is a word which is divided across lines, for example, we have here Cornelio or Cornelio, as you would read it in Byzantine Greek. you don't need to preserve the dash here, which indicates that the word is transferred to another line. You simply say that this is line beginning number so and so, break equals no, which will automatically put the dash at the end of this part of the word which is on that line. You have clear but incomprehensible letters, which usually in epigraphic Leiden conventions are showed with capital letters. You encode them as orig. You have letters which are unclear, not clearly visible, but in the context where they are on the monument, they're comprehensible, but without the context, they would be ambiguous. This is what usually in the Leiden conventions you visualize by dotted letters, letters with dots below. This is something which is encoded as unclear. Where you have lacunae in the text, where you have gaps, which are letters which are not legible, you use gap reason, gap. And then when you have letters which are illegible, you use reason illegible. And when you have a gap which is completely erased, you use gap reason lost. And then you can specify the extent of the gap. If you say here we have a gap of 3 letters which have been lost, you use gap reason lost, quantity 3, unit character. If you have a gap which lasts several lines, you can use quantity unit line instead of character. If you don't know how much is lost, you don't use quantity, but you use extent. As here, gap reason lost, extent unknown. You can have letters which were lost, but then restored by the editor. I don't see where it is here, but it should be supplied. Yes, the most frequent case. The characters which are in rectangular brackets, supplied, reason lost. You can have letters which were omitted by the stonecutter itself, which are usually contained in angular brackets in Leiden. Then you say supplied, reason omitted. You can have letters which were corrected by the editor. Then you usually, we don't have it in our inscription, but you usually have then an element choice with sub-elements which are sic, the thing which is on the stone, and cor, for corrected, the thing which should be. And this is how it is displayed according to the Leiden conventions and according to the transformation scenarios of EFES. If you have an abbreviation which should be resolved in round brackets, you have all the abbreviation is contained within the element expand, and then the part which is present on the stone is abbr, which stands for abbreviated part, and X, the part which is not seen on the stone, which is the expanded part. We will dwell on this later after the break, probably. But here you see, this is a very short summary of all the possible editorial signs that you might have within the text. And if we start doing it one by one, first we probably can start with the line breaks. And yeah, and at first we say, so this indicates a lacuna of a known extent at the beginning of the monument. The monument has been mutilated on its upper part, and we don't know how much of it is lost. So according to what we have here, we should say lacuna of a known extent. So gap, reason lost, extent unknown. We use the attribute extent when we don't know exactly how much it is. And then either unit character, or we may say even unit line, because we don't know for how many lines this is. So we do away with all this and we start gap, reason. You see here you have all the values for the attributes listed. Lost. And you also have here some text which helps you choose between the different values of the elements. Text completely lost from the surface and unrecoverable. This is the case. So we put this. And then we say extent unknown. Extent always has this value, and we can preserve the original layout of the monument, but we don't have to, since we have these elements, these empty elements, which mark boundaries on the stone. And once you put it into the folders of EFES, it will automatically process it, so it would look like this. But if you wish, you can also preserve it, because as I told you, as we saw, there is no big difference for XML if you have this sort of white space or this sort of white space. It's all the same. Maybe it depends on what is more comfortable for you. If you want to scroll up and down this in this way, or more importantly, if you want to scroll left or right. But as you probably saw in Gabby's introduction, here you can, somewhere in the options, you can choose the text wrap option, which does not allow the text to run indefinitely in the horizontal space. But yes, you can even do this with copy and paste. Then we have at least the gap at the beginning and the lines. Two, three, four, and here we have five, and so on and so forth. Let us at least see one of those restored things. You can keep them in your text for a while, so that you can see for the moment which is the part that you as an editor would supply, and which, according to the transformation scenarios that will then be applied to the file, will be visualized as square brackets. This is the os part of the Euxamenos. And then we do away with the Leiden formatting. Well, the line number is indicated into the into the attribute accompanying the line break element. Usually, only the numbers which are divisible by 5 are shown in a normal edition of an epigraphic text. You can, when you install your own EFES and you learn how to work with it, and then you can double with the transformation scenarios which are embedded into it, so that you show, for example, every line numbered, or you show, as in some particular editorial traditions, the even numbers shown, say line number 2, line number 4, line number 6, etc. But by default, you put the n attribute with the respective value for line number, and the thing which is spit out at the end is this. Ideally, line number 1, probably in the EFES scenario, not even line number 1, line number 5, line number 10. This is what you see as in a standard epigraphic edition, following the conventions which we now call the lining conventions. This is how it's displayed. But as I told you, if you play around with EFES long enough, you can double it so as to display like the number to every line, the number to every second line, the number to every third line if you wish, or whatever you wish. But by default, you have a line number 5 here, and on this Euxamenos, Kateskewas, and so on, you don't have any line numbers. But in any case, for the sake of punctuality, be sure to give line numbers to each and every line. And yes, to punctuation marks such as commas and things like that, don't pay attention to this. They can be preserved as is. It depends on the edition. If the edition counts it, if you have a gap, and then, well, it depends on the edition, or it depends on you as an editor. If you have a gap here between line number 4 and line number 6, and you want to indicate this gap as line number, if you have something like this in your edition and you want to indicate it as line number 5, you can do it. It's up to you. But you can, I don't see any reason, and here this is an empty tag, so you can just as well say this. I don't see any reason why we can't, for example, if we have a gap here, why don't we put it and then give this line a number, but then we must specify here that this is not an unknown extent, but this is gap reason lost, quantity equals 1, unit equals line. You have exactly 1 line missing. I don't know if that answers your question and you're wondering, but I would do that. I would do that in this way if I were the editor of this. Okay. Sorry. But I will undo this because this is not what we're aiming at. So yes, we have to do. You remember that this Xml the os part was missing. Well, now there's a very elegant way to do this. You mark the part of the word, the string, as it is called, that you want encoded, and then with, was it with Shift or with Control? With Control E, you can encode it. You can encompass it with an opening and a closing element. This was something which was lost from the original text, but the context allows us to restore it. So it is supplied, and I think we have to reason lost, and then you don't need the square brackets, as this will be displayed at the end as a square bracket. And here we see also this N, which is unclear outside of its context, which means that Control and E, this was unclear. And this should be displayed as a dotted letter at the output. Yes, Command plus C for Mac. But this is a very easy way to do a part of the text that you have to encompass it with the opening and closing tags. Okay, the schedule says that now we have to go for a break, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, you're right.
We can, as you see this text, we can finish it with all the supplied things after we finish. And I will show you more of the presentations concerning the lacunae, the abbreviations, and things like that. We'll go through that. And yes, we'll go on with this. Do you have any questions, doubts, remarks, and other more specific things you would like to know for now? I'll stop sharing my screen now, or maybe I'll preserve it for now. Thank you for following.
I would just like to say, try and save all the links that we put into the chat, so that we can reuse them later, but either way we will put them in the shared document. So just get a hold of it, and yeah, so that we can do exercises on the inscriptions that we already started with.
Yeah.
Oh.
I hope that I've been clear enough. I don't have any idea if you were able to follow all the things that we put on display before you all at once, but as you see, once you start working with the text, it's not that complicated.
It gets super easy. So what do you say? Let's go into a break and then resume at according to the schedule at 2 German time
and Sofia time, and perhaps Greece and Turkey too. It will be 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
In Cyprus also.
Yes.
I don't know. I'm very bad with time zones, but yeah. Okay.
Cool. Then
Cool.
see you later.
See you.
Bye.
Should we leave this?
No, I will send you out, and then the link is always the same.
Okay, but stop live broadcasting because
Yeah, definitely.